This episode was like, girls, we run this mother, yeah. Girls, we run this mother, yeah. Hashtag Black Girl Magic. Lovecraft Country episode 7 entitled I Am. Like, this is an episode that just covers and takes you on a journey of so many facets of womanhood, specifically black womanhood, through a fantasy lens. And if you can't already tell by now, and I'm pretty sure it's not a surprise to anyone if you've been watching my reviews, but I loved this episode. But before I get into this episode, I just wanted to give a special thank you and shout out to all of you guys that have watched my Lovecraft Country reviews, that have just watched my channel. Whether you've been with my channel from the very beginning when I started this channel a year ago, or whether you just found me yesterday, I still say thank you. Thank you for liking the videos. Thank you for commenting below the videos. Thank you for sharing the videos. Thank you for subscribing. And most importantly, thank you for watching the videos. Because of you guys, I finally hit the threshold of not only hitting the subscriber amount necessary, but also hitting the required watch time necessary to finally join the YouTube Partnership Program. Yay! And for those of you that don't know, the YouTube Partnership Program basically means I can now have ads on my videos, which also now means I can start getting paid for making YouTube videos. So once again, I appreciate each and every single one of you guys. Without you, this would not be possible. I didn't even think I would get here, let alone within a year. I thought maybe within 2, 3, 4 years I could get to this point, but the fact that I hit this point within a year, it's all because of you guys. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So if you do see an ad pop up on this video, it's because of you. This is something that I actually didn't know, and something that I learned while going into this journey of becoming part of the YouTube Partnership Program. But when you see a skippable ad pop up on YouTube, and I'm a person that watches a lot of YouTube videos, the moment I see an ad pop up and I can skip it, I automatically click that skip button. But what I didn't realize is that if you do that, that person does not get paid for that video. So if you want to support your boy, help your boy out. If an ad pops up and you can skip it, I don't know, use that opportunity to go to the bathroom or something, or get a glass of water. Don't skip the ad. Let it play so I can start making some money, and then maybe I can invest it into this show, like buy a better camera instead of using my iPhone, or I can also invest in my workspace so I can perhaps have the capability to do live videos. But yeah, but just like the song goes, let the good times roll, I say let those YouTube ads roll. But yeah, so anyway, thanks again for watching. Now on with the Lovecraft Country review. So yeah, episode 7 titled I Am, and this synopsis is taken right from HBO. It says Hippolyta's relentless search for answers takes her on a multi-dimensional journey of self-discovery, and Atticus heads to St. Louis to consult an old family friend. And so yeah, last time we saw Hippolyta was actually in my least favorite episode, episode 4, where she spun Woody, the car that she drives, around, and she drove herself and Dee to Artem Lodge to basically try to figure out and find out the truth behind George's death. And so you see this episode open up with Hippolyta still trying to discover the secrets of how to get the Ori that she stole from Letty's house in episode 3 to work. And we then also get to see a flashback of 3 days earlier where Hippolyta and Dee show up at the former Braithwaite Manor that collapsed in episode 2, and she realizes that George was at that house because she finds a crumpled up copy of Dee's comic, thus confirming her suspicions that indeed there is more to the story regarding George's death. And eventually, after lots of moments of frustration, she's able to figure out how to operate the Ori, and a key is revealed inside, and there's an engraving that says every beginning is in time and every limit of extension in space. And at the bottom there's some coordinates, and I'm like, I don't know what this key does, I don't know what door it opens, but I'm like Oda Mae from Ghost, and I'm like, Hippolyta, you in danger, girl. We then jump to the next scene where we get more answers and a resolution to what's going on with the mysteries of Christina and her shape-shifting abilities with William. And it turns out that my theory was wrong, where I I thought at first that Christina and William were two different people sharing one body, but no, it turns out that it's all Christina. And we also find out what's in Christina's basement, and it turns out it's the bodies of William and the woman that Ruby turned into from episode 5, and she's harnessing their blood to use the potion. And she's also using a version of magic and alchemy to keep their bodies pumping blood. And during this conversation that her and Ruby were having, I was starting to wonder, like, is Christina actually the main villain in this entire season? Now granted, that doesn't necessarily say that I believe that she's a good guy or that I trust her. At the end of the day, she's a white woman in 1950s. She definitely has her own agenda, and she's definitely not somebody to be trusted. But I'm starting to feel like the ultimate villains in this show are the men in the Order of the Ancient Dawn, and also Captain Lancaster. And Christina, in many ways, is almost just as much as a victim as Tick is. But like I said, I don't trust it, because still at the end of the day, that white feminism is still going to creep out and make its way and be problematic as hell to our protagonists. We then see Letty ends up having the very same dream that Tick had earlier, where he's running and trying to escape the Artem Lodge, and Hannah is right in front of her. And from the moment I saw her having this dream, I instantly knew. I was like, oh, so she's pregnant, because from what we've seen previously, the only people that dream of Hannah has been Tick, who is a descendant of Hannah and also a descendant of Titus Braithwaite. Why would Letty be having that dream? Because she now has a descendant of Hannah and Titus Braithwaite inside of her. And then she started touching her stomach, and I'm like, oh yeah, she's definitely pregnant. And just like Tick before her, she ends up waking up right as she's burning, and then she has a conversation with Tick, and they realize that they've been having the same exact dream. And during the conversation, Letty mentions that as she's chasing Hannah, she doesn't have any fear. She doesn't feel scared. And I was just like, are they actually both dreaming of Titus Braithwaite's last moments? And the reason that she doesn't feel any fear is because of the invulnerability spell that Titus Braithwaite cast on himself. And then in Tick's version of the dream, you see Hannah saying something, but he can't make out what they're saying. And I'm like, so is Hannah actually trying to warn them and actually giving them this dream to try to tell them that what she was actually saying was a spell to remove the invulnerability spell from Titus Braithwaite, and that's what she's trying to impart upon them to learn how to remove the invulnerability spell from perhaps Christina and the Order of the Ancient Dawn? And so that's why that dream keeps coming up, and that's why they end up burning at the end, because at first they're perfectly fine. They're not affected by the fire at all until Hannah ends up staring at them and I'm guessing saying that magic spell. But either way, during this conversation, they also learned something that I predicted in one of my earlier reviews, that the book that she ended up leaving with is actually the Book of Names. And so yeah, they're continuing to make progress in the things that they're going to need, because Tick also mentioned that he was able to translate most of the pages that they got from Yahima. Speaking of making progress, we now see Montrose, and he's actually making progress in the relationship between him and Sammy, where he actually let Sammy spend the night at his house for the first time ever. However, learning better, being better, and doing better is a marathon and not a sprint, and Montrose ends up backsliding when Sammy reveals that he actually met one of his neighbors, and he begins to push Sammy away, because like I mentioned before, this is the 1950s. Being a gay man in the 1950s, even in some places that you go today, being gay is a death sentence. Hell, being black during the Jim Crow era, and in many ways even today, can be a death sentence. So being a black gay man, I mean, you kind of understand why Montrose feels the need to want to push Sammy away, but at the same time, you know, because of the trauma and stuff that Montrose has been dealing with, he does it in a very toxic way, instead of just having a conversation with him. But Sammy, he gets tired of the back and forth, because he's been through this song and dance with Montrose before, so he gets up to try to leave. But again, showing a level of progress, Montrose actually goes after him. This is something I feel like he wouldn't have done prior to episode 5. And so he grabs Sammy's hand and tries to pull him back into the house, but guess what? Guess who's right outside the door? Tick and Letty. And so Tick confronts his father and calls him a word that I can't say anymore now that I'm monetized, which Montrose naturally gets upset about and tells Tick to leave. And Tick does, but not before asking if his mother knew about Montrose, which Tick says yes. And it seems like the revelation that his mother knew about it disappoints him even more. And he ends up leaving. He goes outside. He's upset. And then Letty eventually comes outside, and after having a conversation with Montrose, and so she reveals that Tick's mother wasn't the only one that survived the Tulsa Race Massacre. She also has a cousin that survived the massacre. And she lives in St. Louis, which is only 3 hours away from Chicago. And so they should take Woody and drive there and learn the secret and discover where the missing Book of Names is. And so going going more into the whole generational trauma and sins of the father, Tick now has come to the realization that the entire reason that Montrose was beating him to quote unquote not be soft, it wasn't about him at all. It was about Montrose's own personal trauma of being a homosexual himself. And ironically enough, Montrose was doing it to protect his son so he didn't go through the same things that he went through, only to ironically enough be inflicting the same pain and hurt and trauma and torture and abuse that he himself went through. A history of violence. Next, we see Tick failing to convince Hippolyta. I feel like I've been saying Hippolyta most of this time. That's because that's how you say Wonder Woman's name. But Hippolyta, we see Tick fail to convince Hippolyta to let him borrow Woody so he can go to St. Louis. And so he decides to catch the bus. But Letty, after seeing Ruby, decides to stay behind because she wants to have a conversation with her sister, because the last time they spoke, they got into a fight. And so we see during that conversation that Ruby does accept Letty's olive branch because she accused Letty of being as selfish as her mother, but Letty actually apologizes to her. And Ruby is like, you know, in all of Mama's life, I've never heard her apologize, but Letty did. And so we see that they're slowly beginning to heal their relationship, and also because Ruby knows a lot more than she's letting on now. And she probably also knows that the money to buy that house didn't actually come from their mother. It came from Christina. And we then see Hippolyta in Woody on a road trip, and she's listening to Josephine Baker. And the only reason I knew it was Josephine Baker is because while that song was playing, I ended up Shazamming it, and it told me, and I'm like, best invention ever, Shazam. No, this video is not sponsored by Shazam. But then we see a woman pass her by in a motorcycle, and Hippolyta seems excited to see her. And as I was watching it, I was like, I don't know what this moment represents, but it's definitely got to be something important. And it turns out that this woman was actually playing a historical figure named Bessie Stringfield, who was known as the Negro Motorcycle Queen, which later became the Motorcycle Queen of Miami. And Stringfield was actually the first black woman to drive her motorcycle solo across the entire United States, which doing that during the time of Jim Crow was incredibly brave. And not only just because being black was possibly a death sentence, but then also she could have been violated for her womanhood, if you catch my drift. We then jump to the next scene and we see Tick made it to St. Louis, and he's speaking to this woman named Miss Osberta. And I was like, God damn, that's a black name if I ever heard one. Now granted, it's not the same, but it actually reminded me of my late grandmother's name, Johnny May. She believes that the book that he's looking for was burnt up in the fires of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And as I've gotten older, my birthday just passed this Sunday. I just turned 35. Happy birthday to me. I've become more and more interested in history, specifically my history, black history, African history. And this whole scene, I just kept thinking to myself like, damn, my grandparents on both my mother and father's side, they died when I was like really young. So in many ways, I barely remember them. And I was just like, damn, I just wish I can ask them things of like their lives growing up in this terrible time of Jim Crow and just how they grew up. There's just things I wish I could ask them that I can't. And so jumping ahead, we then see Letty. She's actually playing cards with Dee and her friends. And once again, they mention Bobo, Emmett Till's character. And this time one of the characters says, when is Bobo coming back? So that tells you that Emmett Till is now in Mississippi. And sadly, we know what ends up happening to him when he's in Mississippi. And I'm like, they continue to reference and mention this character and his eventual trip to Mississippi. This has to play a part in the story, because otherwise I'm like, why keep bringing it up? But anyway, we see Letty go into the kitchen to check on Ruby because she's making them dinner. And while she's making them dinner, Ruby actually tries to get Letty to taste what she's making, and Letty ends up getting sick from the smell of the garlic, which shocks Ruby because Letty loves garlic. And Letty tries to play it off by saying, oh, she's just having a food allergy. She's like, you could have a food allergy or you're pregnant. And so Letty ends up running into Hippolyta's room to go get some air, and it's there that she finds out that Hippolyta actually stole the Ori out of her house, which also reveals to them that Hippolyta knows way more than she's been letting on. And so she calls Tick in St. Louis to let him know, but also Tick, while he was going through photo albums of his cousin Ethel, he notices that she has the same exact birthmark that he has, only it's in two different spots. And I'm like, considering they said magic runs in his family, since Hannah did have the book of names, I'm like, is that some type of magic mark? Probably. We then see Hippolyta arrive at the location that the coordinates led her to, and it's an observatory. And she begins to get her hidden figures on and basically trying to calculate how to get the observatory working. And granted, you knew this beforehand, but this moment right here really shows how smart Hippolyta is. And so she finally gets it working, but right when she gets it working, you hear two cops, two of Captain Lancaster's men, enter the observatory, and they're very suspicious because now the observatory is on, where they couldn't figure out how to get it working before because the Ori was missing. And they run into Hippolyta, and right when it looks like they're about to shoot her in a very convenient television way, Tick shows up at the very right moment, and he ends up saving Hippolyta. And so there's a struggle with the cops, and during that struggle, some type of portal opens, and Tick ends up throwing one of the cops into the portal, and Hippolyta ends up shooting and killing another cop. And then right after she shoots the cop, both Hippolyta and Tick end up getting sucked into that portal that opened up. But in the next scene, we end up only following what happens when Hippolyta gets sucked into the portal. And she ends up on some type of planet, and she's approached by these two celestial looking beings, and then she wakes up completely naked in what looks like some type of spaceship. And eventually one of those celestial beings reveals themselves in what I think is one of the blackest moments I've ever seen on television, where the celestial being enters and she's revealed to be a black woman, and she has the biggest afro I've ever seen on television. And naturally Hippolyta's confused. She doesn't know what's going on, so she asks this woman, who is she? What is she? And this celestial being, who I later found out from the end credits, it turns out that this woman's name is Beyonce, homage to Beyonce. Oh, I'm a single ladies. Oh, I'm a single ladies. And Hippolyta tells this woman that she can't keep her here forever. Eventually she's gonna escape. And Beyonce says, you are not in prison. And then she leaves. But despite hearing that she's not in prison, try as she might, she can't escape. And so she's trying to use her level of genius to try to work out, like, is she on another planet? Is she on a ship? Where is she? And during this scene, you see like coordinates pop up on the bottom of the screen. I don't even have a guess of what those coordinates represents. Like me, my expertise and knowledge base is more fantasy, comic book related. Like, yeah, I'm a fan of sci-fi, but I don't watch sci-fi that much. I don't even know. I can't even, like I said, I can't even make a guess of what those coordinates mean. But eventually Beyonce ends up coming back, and Hippolyta tries to run through the front door, and Beyonce stops her, and Hippolyta's screaming like, let me go. And Beyonce once again says, you are not in prison. And it kind of made me instantly think of Bob Marley's Redemption song, where it's like, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, none but ourselves can free our minds. So yeah, she's not in prison, and she might not be able to leave in the way she thinks. She can leave at any time she wants. She just has to leave in the right way. And so Beyonce tells her that she needs to name herself, tell her where she wants to be. And Hippolyta's confused. She doesn't know what she's talking about, but sarcastically she says she wants to be on stage dancing with Josephine Baker. And in an almost genie type of way, her wish is granted, and she ends up on stage with Josephine Baker in Paris, which I believe was the 1930s. And naturally she's confused. She doesn't know what's going on. So everybody around her is dancing, and she's on stage messing up the dance moves, and the dancers around her are naturally annoyed because they feel like they're messing up her show. And at the end of the dance performance, she ends up having a conversation with Josephine Baker, and Josephine Baker basically tells her like, yeah, I've had my off days too, but you need to loosen up. You're not in America anymore. And loosen up is exactly what she did. Like, Hippolyta is living it up with Josephine. We see her partying with Josephine. She's drinking, she's smoking marijuana, she's flirting with men and women, and she even sniffs cocaine. And I was just like, oh, okay, girl, live your life, live it up, do you, boo. And we also see a brief nod to the fact that Josephine Baker was bisexual and was in a romance with Mexican painter Frida Kahlo. And I'm just like, I love this show. Like, it's giving us so much history, and it's giving me just so many things to research that I didn't know about. And so yeah, Hippolyta has been living her best life. And so the next time we see Hippolyta on stage, she has those dance moves down pat, and she seems to be enjoying her life and living a life that she never really got to live in Jim Crow America. And Josephine and Hippolyta end up having a conversation, and she's like, being here with you and living this life that I've been living, she's felt more free here than she's ever felt in her entire life. And it goes back to something that Christina said to Ruby in episode 5, where she said the promise of magic allows you to experience unmitigated freedom. It gives you the ability to be uninterrupted. And Hippolyta is pissed off, naturally so, because white people in America wouldn't allow her to be more than what she is now. Because even going back to thinking of the episode 4, where she was the one that ended up naming a comet, but yet the credit from her was taken away because she's a black woman. You see that Hippolyta is pretty much a genius and she loves space, so maybe she had desires to be an astrophysicist or an astronaut, but because of the color of her skin, and we also can't forget her gender, she's not allowed to do it because guess what? This is the 1950s. During this time, women weren't allowed to open up a bank account without their husband's signature and approval. Women weren't allowed to attend Ivy League schools in the 1950s. Women weren't allowed to have a job if they got pregnant. And in many ways, women were frowned upon having a job. The only job that women should have during this time was to be a housewife. Women weren't allowed to serve on juries with jury duty. Hell, women weren't even allowed to run marathons and buy women's athletic shoes back then, which is crazy. And so Hippolyta says that racism and patriarchy basically allowed for her, white people allowed for her to become the exact Negro woman that they wanted her to be. And she essentially feels like they found a clever way to lynch her without her noticing the noose, because she's been shrinking herself and making herself small. And really she had to do so because of survival. She talked about a metaphorical noose around her neck. If she asserted herself and asserted her womanhood and asserted her power as a smart black woman, she could have literally been lynched. And Hippolyta then names herself again. She says, I am Hippolyta, and she's transferred to the ancient Amazons of old. And remember I was saying earlier in one of my reviews that I was curious if the fact that her name is Hippolyta and her daughter's name is Diana, which is actually both they tie into Greek mythology, but also Hippolyta and Diana are the names of Wonder Woman and Wonder Woman's mother. I was wondering if that was going to come into play. Well, this is the moment that comes into play because Hippolyta is with the ancient African Amazons called the Dahomey tribe. And the Dahomey tribe is actually a real life Amazonian warrior tribe based in Africa that was actually used by comic book legend Christopher Priest to base Black Panther's Dora Milaje. And again, this is something that you don't learn in schools, but the Dahomey Amazons remain the only documented frontline female warriors in all of warfare history. And the woman that's training Hippolyta, her name is Nawi, and we learned that in real life, Nawi was the last known survivor of the Dahomey Amazons who died at the age of 100 in 1979. And so Nawi is saying to Hippolyta basically all the things that I said earlier about white people wanting you to be a certain way and you believe that you're not, and that's why you're here. And so they train. Now Nawi teaches her how to fight, and then we get into a training montage and she becomes better and better and better and more proficient at sword combat, where she ends up taking Nawi out. And then she finally gets her wish where she says, I wish I could kill white people, and she ends up fighting and killing a bunch of what I believe are British colonizing soldiers. And even though I did enjoy this scene, I could definitely tell, like the fight choreography in this scene, it definitely wasn't like a Marvel movie or even John Wick or even a CW show. It was very slow, and you could definitely tell it was fight choreography, but at the same time, I still enjoyed it because how many times do you get to see black women in these types of situations, in these types of warrior movies? Like, how many times do you get to see older men in these action movies? You don't really get to see the same for women. And after killing a bunch of soldiers, Hippolyta says to her fellow Amazons, we are here because we did not believe them when they said our rage was not ladylike. We are here because we did not believe them when they said our violence goes too far. We did not believe them when they said the hatred that we feel for our enemies is not godlike. They say to women like us because they know what happens when we are free. Free to hate when we must. Free to kill when we must. Free to bring destruction when we must. That is our freedom. That is our prayer. No matter what they think of us after we grind them to the dust, that is our love. And I was just like, bravo for that speech. And I'm just like, how many times have women, specifically black women, been told that they need to smile more and being angry is unbecoming of a lady? Or when a woman gets excited or angry about something, they're considered hormonal. But when a man does it, they're considered passionate. And it's like, no, sometimes it's okay to be enraged about certain things, especially being a black person in America, specifically being a black woman and all the stuff that they have to go through. I was about to say another word, but again, I gotta censor myself. But ultimately, it's what you do with that rage and that anger that matters. And so going through slavery, Jim Crow, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, like, you damn right people have a right to be angry. And you have no right to tell me I shouldn't be. And then after getting out all that rage and anger, she then names herself George's wife. And so then she wakes up in George's bed and we finally get to see a return of the legendary Courtney Vance's character. And eventually during their conversation, Hippolyta confesses to him, despite how quote unquote perfect her marriage seems on paper and despite how much of a good man George is, she confesses that basically even George is a victim to a patriarchal system, and even he allowed her to shrink herself and not live up to her true potential, because never once did he ask her to go on his safe Negro guide trips. He was perfectly fine with her sitting at home being the dutiful housewife, despite how smart she is and despite him falling in love with her because of how smart and curious she was. He was perfectly fine with pursuing his dreams. He was perfectly fine with pursuing his dreams, but not even talking to her about maybe what her dreams and goals are. And after naming her disappointment, George admits guilt and realizes that yes, he's been culpable in Hippolyta shrinking herself. And he apologizes to her, which is a very big move that a lot of people, especially men, just will not do. Because you even see when she's talking to him, he kind of gets defensive at first, but then he realizes like, no, she's actually right. And I was just like, how many women have been and continue to be and will be in Hippolyta's position? How many women will continue to shrink themselves for men, allowing the men to pursue their dreams and goals and desires and wants, but they're forced to sit at home and take care of the kids? Like, I think about my own mother's situation. I grant it's not necessarily the same, but at the same time, like, her father, my grandfather, ended up taking her out of school at a very young age because as the oldest daughter, he looked at her as the one to help take care and raise her own siblings, which is not her job. And she had her own dreams and desires to be a nurse, but yet her father would not help her achieve those dreams. Or you think about women that are in their 20s or their late 30s, especially if they're in their late 30s, especially if they're unmarried and don't have kids. People usually always ask them, when are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? When are you going to have kids? When are you going to have kids? As if a woman's worth is solely based on the fact that they have a man, a husband, or they have kids. What if you don't want kids? What if you don't want to get married? Like me, granted, I'm gay, so I'm not going to get married to a woman, but if I were heterosexual, nobody would look at me as a heterosexual man, an unmarried heterosexual man. Nobody would ask me, when am I going to have kids? I mean, hell, they even have a sexy terminology for unmarried straight men as an eligible bachelor. They don't have that for unmarried women. And then you look at somebody like Michelle Obama. She's admitted plenty of times that she's hated politics and never wanted to enter the realm of politics. And we do know that she too went to law school like Barack Obama. So did she actually want to be first lady? Did she perhaps shrink herself so her husband can pursue his desires and goals to be the first black president? Maybe she wanted to open up her own law firm. Who knows? I'm not saying that Michelle Obama did shrink herself, but it is a question. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? Langston Hughes. George then says to Hippolyta that he sees her now and he wants her to be as big as she wants to be. And so Hippolyta names herself Hippolyta the Discoverer, but this time she leads George with her, and you end up seeing them exploring space in a spaceship version of Woody, and you see them meeting alien life forms. They're examining alien plant life. And again, like I said before, this show just gives you so much to research, because while they're doing this exploration, a monologue from a movie that I've never heard of came out in 1974. I think it's called Space is the Place, and this character named Sun Ra is basically saying that he believes that black people are a myth, because if black people weren't a myth, if black people were real, we wouldn't need to fight for equal rights. If black people were real, we would have status among the nations of the world. If black people were real, we wouldn't have to assert our humanity to the world. And eventually, at a certain point, Hippolyta is summoned before Beyonce, and this time she's looking way more godlike than when we first saw her, and she tells Hippolyta that now that she's named herself, she no longer needs those technological devices in her arm, and that the change will now be permanent, and now she can fully integrate into a higher plane of existence now that she's experienced everything that she's experienced, essentially becoming woke. Because once you're able to name yourself, once you're able to heal yourself, once you're able to step beyond your own mental trauma, and once you're able to educate yourself further, you do come out of it on the other side a completely different person. And sometimes you look at the life that you had beforehand and the friends that you had before, and maybe you don't want to associate yourself with them anymore because they might bring you back down to that level of trauma that you were living with. And so Beyonce tells her that she can choose to remain the same. She can choose to remain unchanged and return back to her earth if she wants. And so the next scene, we see Tick ends up coming out of the portal. Hippolyta stays behind, and although we don't experience what Tick saw during his time in that that portal, we see him emerge with a book in his hand that's titled Lovecraft Country by George Freeman. And I think it says something like a look at the worlds within worlds within worlds. And he's calling for his Aunt Hippolyta. He's wondering where she is, but he ends up leaving because he doesn't see her, and he hears sirens in the background, and he doesn't want to be caught, smartly so, with a dead cop lying right next to him. And so he ends up leaving. And I was also, part of me was like, why didn't they just throw the cop in the portal? But I guess at the same time, they didn't really have time to do that because they instantly got sucked into the portal right after that. But either way, you end up seeing that the camera ends up panning down on the cop, and you see that Diana's comic, Arithia Blue, is sitting right under the cop, and it has her name, Diana Freeman, plastered right on the cover. And then the episode ends. Dun, dun, dun! And I'm just like, well, damn. And typically, I try not to watch previews for the next episode. I want to go into it as fresh and surprised as I can. I have a strong feeling that next week's episode, and I could be wrong, it won't be the first time I'm wrong, but if the cops do end up going after Diana, I feel like it's going to definitely tie into and parallel what's happening with the Emmett Till character, especially considering Diana and Emmett Till are friends and they are around the same age. And it's about the cops more than likely going after her and probably wanting to pursue the death sentence. But yeah, I don't know. But that's my prediction for next week's episode. Let's see if I'm right. With that said, though, I don't think Dee is going to die. But yeah, it's definitely going to be some type of connection. But yeah, this episode right here, this episode was definitely for Black women. And it also goes to show like the power within the Black community, and not just the Black community, but in general, the power of naming things. Because even going back to episode 3, where you think about the ghosts that were trapped inside Letty's house, where they only got the power to help Letty defeat and take out and banish Hiram Epstein when Letty named them. Also in religion, they talk about all the time the power of the tongue, the power of speaking things into existence. And even going back to the second episode where Tony Goldwyn's character talked about how God gave Adam the power to name all the creatures of the world, or even going into like exorcism lore where if you know a demon's name, you have power over that demon. Or in real life with the Black Lives Matter movement, we say what? Hashtag say their names. And also going back to what I just said, like this episode was definitely being for Black women. This episode really kind of shows you how Black women have been excluded from a lot of genres in film and television in a very significant way. Black women didn't really have any major roles in Wonder Woman, despite the fact that in the comics, the person that trained Wonder Woman and the person that raised Wonder Woman and the person that was the general of the Amazonian Guard, her name was Philippus. And Philippus was a Black Amazonian woman. However, in the movie, the character of Antiope really didn't have anything to do with Diana's upbringing and her training as a warrior. It was Philippus who was the right-hand woman of Queen Hippolyta. So yeah, despite Robin Wright's performance being great, it was at the expense of a Black character. And it wasn't until just 2 years ago in 2018 that you saw Black women in a significant role in the MCU with the Dora Milaje. But even with that, there hasn't been any type of announcement of a Black female superhero in the MCU getting her own solo movie. How many leading Black women are there in Star Wars? None. Hell, there are barely any leading Black men in Star Wars. Now granted, yeah, you got Mace Windu and you got Lando, but I wouldn't call them leading. And yeah, don't even get me started on what they did with John Boyega's Finn character and the fact that they didn't make hashtag Stormpilot canon in those movies. How many Black women do you see leading horror franchises? Are there any Black women leading in a significant way in the new hit show Raised by Wolves? I don't know. I'm just asking because I haven't watched it. But my suspicion is probably not. And despite really enjoying the show, there are no Black women leads in The Boys. And so yeah, with that said, I enjoyed getting to see Hippolyta, played by Anjuan Ellis, a Black woman and an older, darker skinned Black woman, get to explore all these different types of genres and moments that you don't really get to see Black women enjoy in television and movies in a significant way. But also this episode got me thinking, Christina and Captain Lancaster also wanted the Ori, and they also wanted to go through and have access to this portal that they went through. And part of me wonders, like, if they were to go through this portal, would they see Beyonce, or would they see a version of Elvis still music from Black People Presley? Or maybe Christopher Colonizer? Because Christina kind of talked about the Ori leading you to more information on how to translate the Book of Names, but we didn't really see any reference to that in this episode. But yeah, also, are we gonna learn what Tick saw? But yeah, I don't know. I just had a really fun time with this episode. I really enjoyed this episode. And yeah, now we're down to our final 3 episodes of this season. I'm hoping this show gets another season. There has to be another season because I feel like there's so much more information on the table that they can't get out in just 3 episodes. But the question is, what did you guys think of episode 7 of Lovecraft Country I Am? Let me know down in the comment section below. Also, if you can't hit that thumbs up button button and like this video to really help out the channel. If this is one of your first time checking out one of my videos, please check out the other videos on my channel. And if you like what you see, please subscribe for more and hit that bell notification button so you're alerted every single time I post a new video. And tell your friends, your families, your neighbors about my channel to help me continue to grow. And as always, I will catch you guys next time. Girls, we run this mother. Yeah.